What a night. What a fantastic crowd. Welcome to Ron Paul at Mississippi State, Liberty Defined. My name is Matthew Burrow, and I want to thank each and every one of you and commend you for braving the elements and making it out tonight. In the past 2 hours, we've seen hail, we've seen lightning, thunder, downpour, tornadoes, but the clouds have parted, the sky is clear, and the revolution is still here. Now, before I introduce the man who is going to introduce the man, I would be remiss to not acknowledge and inform you a little bit about the sponsoring organizations of tonight's event. The Campaign for Liberty and Young Americans for Liberty. In June of 2008, the Campaign for Liberty was formed, and in that time, over 600,000 of your fellow Americans have joined the fight to restore our republic, to fight for constitutional principles of limited government, free markets, sound money, and a non-interventionist foreign policy. Yeah. Amen. Those 600,000 members have taken the battle into their own backyard, not only on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., but in state capitals all across the country. This year, the Campaign for Liberty will be focusing on auditing the Federal Reserve, fighting against the warrantless wiretaps of the Patriot Act, as well as ending the mandate for Obamacare. It's rather appropriate that Congressman Paul, who is considered the most conservative congressman in all of 435, is here in one of the states that's considered one of the more conservative ones. But I want to remind you that it is an election year here in Mississippi, and you need to get involved at your state and local levels and your precincts. Go door to door, file petitions. We need to send a statement into Jackson this year. So please get involved in your local elections. Make sure you know who your representatives and state senators are. Join the Campaign for Liberty. You know, over 2.5 years ago, we founded, me, some of my friends and fellow students founded the Young Americans for Liberty chapter here on Mississippi State. In that time, they've become the most active student organization on campus. They've had countless activism events, recruitment events, and the message of liberty is spreading like wildfire on this campus, and many campuses across the country. I'd like to acknowledge some of the most active students who made this event tonight possible. They collected nearly 2,300 signatures from students on campus to get Congressman Paul here tonight. The Mississippi Chairman, Kyler Reeves, deserves a big round of applause, as well as the Panshu Chabra, Alex Habergorst, and the chapter president, who I'm about to introduce. Benjamin Weinberg, please come out.
Yeah, I would like to thank everyone for coming out for this evening. Definitely the weather was exceptionally bad. You all are awesome for being here right now. Yeah, we're excited to have our guests here tonight, and I'm not going to waste too much time with an introduction. But as Nat alluded to earlier, I'm Ben Weinberg. I'm the current president of the Mississippi State University chapter of Young Americans for Liberty. We are part of a nationwide organization of students that have dedicated their time to championing the cause of the free markets, sound money, a non-interventionist foreign policy, along with being staunch opponents of government abuse of power. Following our guest campaign in 2008, Young Americans for Liberty was launched out of the hundreds of students from Ron Paul groups that came up across the nation. I was certainly one of the individuals who had my political foundations rocked by our guest. His extraordinarily principled and consistent record shook me to my core, really. He caught my attention because he was far from being a figure who vaguely and superficially stated what his audience wanted to hear. Instead, he spoke of ideas that challenged a widely accepted role of government in our day-to-day lives. Although being resistant at first, I quickly came to be a true believer in the philosophy of liberty that he espoused. Generally, in the political discourse in our country, being supporters of free markets with sound money, civil liberties, and a non-interventionist foreign policy is readily ridiculed as being impractical and far too principled. Our guest tonight will help dismiss of this notion. We are ruled by a political class who has taken it as their duty to expand their job description, far beyond the reaches of their capabilities, and is most definitely far beyond the intention of the founding fathers of the country. Far worse than that, they have taken it upon themselves to police the rest of the world and attempt to mold it into their designs through the exercise of brute power. While the United States government is essentially on the course of financial bankruptcy, with a national debt of over $14 trillion and unfunded liabilities like Social Security and Medicaid amounting to over $100 trillion. Political figures continue to promote the expansion of government power and influence even farther into society. The famous 20th century skeptic and social critic H.O. Mencken once stated that a good politician is quite as unthinkable as an honest burglar. H.O. Mencken had never had a chance to meet our guest tonight. Ron Paul is a 13th-term member of the House of Representatives representing the 14th District of Texas. He is a doctor who served the United States Air Force and who, as an obstetrician, has delivered thousands of children. Please rise and help me give a warm round of applause to Congressman Ron Paul.
Looks like the tornadoes haven't chased you away, and thank you for coming. It's so nice of you to come.
We are the tornado.
If we want to control the next one, right? But I do want to thank the chapter here for Young Americans for Liberty, as well as the Campaign for Liberty, for hosting this event. And I want to thank all of you who happen to have signed the petition, because that had a lot to do with our scheduling. So I am very pleased to be here, and it's very nice to see a nice crowd and enthusiasm, which means to me that the revolution has arrived to Mississippi. Tonight I'll talk a lot about the problems that we have, and sometimes they're pretty bad, and I won't put a good light on them, except for one thing. I am convinced that we have the answers. I'm convinced that you as a generation can do something about it, and we don't have to be locked in on this. All we have to do is restore our confidence and freedom and understanding of what a free society is all about. I am convinced that we can solve our problems. Tonight, though, I want to talk a little bit, about what's been going on in Washington. I'm sure you've read about it, you hear about it. And, there's a budget crisis in Washington. You've heard a little bit about that. But, we're not even on the verge of solving the problem. We have Republicans and Democrats. And Democrats want to spend a lot of money, and Republicans want to spend a lot of money. And they've argued over this budget. We had the budgetary vote this week. And the litmus test for conservatives was to vote, for the Republican budget. And the reason we were supposed to vote for it was going to cut $6.2 trillion off, cut $6.2 trillion. But they never told you what, that it was off the proposed increases of what Obama promised. But the Democrats, of course, wanted to spend a lot more money. But if you look at it, we find out that if you looked at the Obama projections, that in 2016, the national debt would be $20 trillion, just a few more $1 trillion added on. But if you vote for the conservative Republicans in 2016, you will only have $19 trillion worth of deficit. So, guess what? I voted no on that. I didn't think it was acceptable. Difficult difficult. I went to Washington the first time. I've been there a couple times. I went in the 1970s because I was concerned about what would happen to this country after they closed the gold window and we lost the last link to the gold standard. And I thought, boy, the spending is going on and it's going to get much worse. So I went with the deep conviction that what had to be done was to set a standard and just quit spending all this money. So as long as I've been in office, I've never voted for these appropriations. I've never voted for them because I believed that we would come to this point where we would meet a major crisis. And today we haven't. In 2008, it was predictable by the Austrian free market economists that we were in the midst of a big bubble. But guess what? Our good friend over at the Federal Reserve, a guy by the name of Bernanke, said, don't worry, there's no bubble, everything is going to be okay. Well, he missed that call just a bit. And then the bubble burst and we got into all these problems that we've had these last couple of years. And they claim that they have bailed us out. And got us out. They prevented the depression. Everybody was to rush back to Washington if they were out of town to vote for the TARP funds to bail out, Wall Street and the banks and the big corporations, or we would have a depression. And I've been challenged by this because obviously I was completely opposed to this. And they said, "Well, why don't you care? There would have been a depression." I said, yeah, but the depression would have been for Wall Street, not on the average person who ended up losing their jobs and losing their house. What we need to do is straighten the system out. But I remember during that campaign, I was involved a little bit back in 2008, but after the two main candidates were running, the TARP fund vote came up. And they both felt like it was an absolute emergency to get back to town and register a vote on the TARP funds because they didn't want to seem negligent on something as important as this. So both of them rushed back to vote for it. And I got to thinking, what in the devil? I thought the parties, at least theoretically, during campaign time, are supposed to be different. But that is our problem in this country, that we have a single party system and we need a little time. If you listen to the rhetoric, yes, there's always difference. One is anti-war, and one is pro-war, and one is pro-civil liberties, and the other isn't. One's fiscal conservatives and against big government and welfare programs. But if you put the Democrats in charge, they're every bit as bad as the Republicans when it comes to spreading wars around the world and violating civil liberties. Rhetoric of the Republicans, and they come in and say, okay, what we have to do is get our house in order, so we'll first double the size of the Department of Education and introduce Bush Care, which is prescription drug program, and that is to solve the problem. No, our problem is, and I say this seriously, we've had way too much bipartisanship for about 70 years in Washington. The foreign policy doesn't change, the monetary policy doesn't change, the welfare policy doesn't change, the protection of our personal privacy, that doesn't change. And we need bipartisanship, but we have to get both parties and the people to agree on doing the right things. To have bipartisanship to do the wrong things, that won't help us. And that is what I think our job is. This new generation that's coming in and interested in this is to get a consensus of people, building coalitions left and right and center or wherever to come together on the issues that we agree on. Because then, if we're doing the right thing, we want to bring people together. One of the worst statements made by a president, at least philosophically speaking, on economics was what Nixon said when he, issued wage and price controls, closed the gold window, and put a tariff on imports. And that was in 1971. He says, but we're all Keynesians now. But I think it's time that we reject that notion that we all have to follow Keynesian economics and start looking at Austrian free market economics. are what count. The rhetoric doesn't count. You know, we are overseas, and we've been overseas for the wrong reasons ever since Woodrow Wilson decided that we had to go around the world to make the world safe for democracy. Got us, our country, whipped up and got involved in World War I when there was no need to, which then led to a century of killing and war, and our policies haven't changed. So what we need to do is to look at our foreign policy, our monetary policy, our economic policy with a different lens. And this isn't like it's a brand new one. Freedom's been around a bit. Unfortunately, we are not doing a very good job in preserving it. Freedom is a relatively new idea. It's become, you know, it was a grand experiment for our country. And we did very well. Never perfect, but pretty well, because we respected property rights and sound money and contract rights. And we did that for a long time, and we had great prosperity. And now what we have done is we have undermined that system, and we are facing a crisis. We don't have to reinvent the whole idea. We certainly can improve on the views that we had before. Even on the gold standard that we had in the 19th century was far from a perfect gold standard. We got in a lot of trouble because we didn't follow the gold standard. So there's a lot of improvements, a lot of refinements. Even when the founders wrote in the Constitution by not giving authority to be the policeman of the world, and then strongly advised us to stay out of entangling alliances. Don't get involved in internal affairs of other nations. But it wasn't long after the Constitution was written that we started going away from that. So what we need is to understand how we got into this mess, where the mistakes were made, where are the political problems that we have, and then deciding what is it that we do believe in? What is it that will answer these questions? And very fortunately for us, we don't have to, revamp the Constitution. Sure, we can have some refinements. It can be better. It was never a perfect document. But we at least have a pretty good starting block. The big problem in Washington is they don't follow the Constitution. And we need people that will follow the Constitution, and I believe we can. I think you remember last fall the Republicans took over the Congress. You remember that, the House? And it was a good proposal, and they said we should be more attuned to the Constitution. So each time you introduce legislation now, you have to write down what part of the Constitution you're getting authority from. And I think this is very, very good. But it doesn't solve the problem. Because those who want bigger government, they just write down the General Welfare Clause, the Interstate Commerce Clause, and the Necessary and Proper Clause. So it's the way they interpret it or want to interpret it, and the way they have been taught that you don't want an overly rigid document. You want one that's flexible and adaptable to modern times. And they have no sense of remorse about not obeying their oath of office. It's just that they have a different understanding. So that is what's going to be required, is the understanding of the people, so they only send people to Washington that have the knowledge about the Constitution, that we can reverse the situation. But today we face a continuing financial crisis. The bubble burst, and we sort of put that aside, at least for the moment, but it really isn't solved. Matter of fact, it's much worse than it has been. We got into that mess because of decades of spending too much and borrowing too much and taxing too much and regulating too much and printing too much paper money. That's what got us there. So we finally have the predictable collapse of the financial bubble. So what did Congress do, and what did the Federal Reserve do? They started spending more money, they started borrowing more money, they started printing more money, they started more regulations, and they think that's the solution, to the mess that we have. But all it did was transfer, bad debt from one group who were making out like bandits during the inflationary period, because there were people working with these derivatives and all the gambling going on, and they were doing quite well. But it was all, a speculative bin based on the inflationary climate that was produced by the Federal Reserve. So that finally comes, and then they scare everybody, scare candidates to run back and vote for the bailout because the financial crisis is here and you'll have a depression if you don't, take care of it. But what they did was they took all those bad assets and transferred them to us, the people, now own them, whether they're in the Federal Reserve or whether the Treasury buys them or whatever. So the people who made out so well got the rewards, and the people who suffer the most are the ones who will suffer the consequences that are yet to come. Because we don't have real wealth. In capitalism, you're supposed to work hard, produce, use what you need to live, save, and reinvest, or let somebody else reinvest your money, have savings. But we don't do that. We just live on borrowed money. Our country does it, individuals do it, corporations do it, and that eventually leads to this problem that we have today, and nobody's quite willing to say, we have to turn this off, we have to turn it around, because if we don't, we're going to get ourselves into a big mess. Well, the big mess is here. It's been propped up. The proper thing to do under an understanding of free market economics, if government gets out of control, spends too much, and they create an inflationary bubble, and the market says too much, you have to quit because you're overextended, the best thing to do is allow the liquidation of the debt. Get rid of it. Of debt and get rid of all the malinvestment, the bad mistakes. But politicians can't do that. They're incapable of doing that, at least since 1921. They haven't been able to do it. So they have to say, I'm the politician and I know what's best and this is what we have to do. So they don't permit the market to liquidate. We didn't allow it to happen in the 30s. Japan hasn't allowed it to happen for 20 years now, and they're in the doldrums. So here it is, we're doing it once again. We're not allowing the liquidation to occur. Under those circumstances, the crisis could be over in a year or two, and it had been over by now if that would have been permitted. So we now have another problem, because this whole system, not only domestically, not only for the United States, but for around the world, anybody who needed bailing out, they came to us because the dollar was still seen as the gold, in a fictitious sense. Because we issued the reserve currency of the world, 75% of the reserves in the world are held in paper dollars, and when countries got into trouble, or businesses got into trouble, banks got into trouble, it was always resorting to printing more money. And now what we face, is a dollar crisis. And this week was a very important week because Standard & Poor rating system said that the dollar is going to be rated down, and this is very serious. Standard & Poor and the other bond rating agencies prior to the bust in 2008 were completely wrong on all their predictions. They always said things were okay, things weren't bad, these bonds were okay. So they're always more optimistic. So this warning, I think, is very, very reserved, and that if they were telling the truth, they would let you know that the dollar is going to be going through a lot more trouble. The only true measurement, or the best measurement of a currency historically for 5,000 years, has been the relationship of the currency to gold. Now, that wasn't something I invented. Nobody invented it. The market invented it. And even though for decades now we have been in denial and say, no, that's old-fashioned stuff. We don't have to do that. We know how to print money and take care of the value of money. But now, our dollar, at one time, not in the 1920s, before the Depression, a dollar was worth 1/20th of an ounce of gold. That's what the backing was. Today it's 1/1500th of an ounce of gold, and going up in an exponential fashion. This should be a sharp warning of what's happening. But people like Greenspan and Bernanke, when I would bring this up, they say, no, it's okay. we don't really buy into that anymore. And they deceive themselves. They actually believe that just printing money can take care of it. Bernanke, if you read his material, he says the only reason we were in the Depression and couldn't get out of the Depression, we didn't print the money fast enough. And he, of course, assured us, if he was ever in charge, before he was the chairman, he says, if it were ever necessary, he says, I will make sure, even if it's necessary, I will drop paper money out of helicopters in order to make sure that we don't have a recession. Or we'll get you out of recession. But it can't work. It's not working right now. And therefore, we are going to be pushed into a monetary crisis. Now, I have a very strong opinion, I bet you most of you know, about the Federal Reserve. You know, my position is we want to get rid of the Federal Reserve. Of course, in the meantime, the least we can do is audit the Federal Reserve to find out what they've been up to. So many of you, last congressional term, we did get, the bill passed out of the House to audit the Federal Reserve. It was watered down by the time it went through the Senate. But we did get a partial audit, and there were some court rulings that allows us now to look at more of what's going on at the Fed. And I imagine most of you saw that story out recently that one of the two individuals that got some bailout money from the Federal Reserve, two wives of some executives, $220 million. And it just happened that shortly after they got that loan to bail out their business, which was a brand new business, they bought a $13.5 million new house. And this is the kind of thing that goes on. Now, most people can understand $200 million loan and a $13.5 million house. It's hard to comprehend the trillions. It's so massive. It even blows my mind when I think about it. They passed out $3.3 trillion, to their buddies. And they were totally arrogant. We don't have to tell you anything. We don't have to. They can print more money and pass it out, bail out their friends, and think they can do it in complete secret, more money than even the Congress can do. And that's why they fear a true audit, because we will find out what they have been doing, and they know that in the midst of a crisis, we'll have to have a revamping of the system. The monetary crisis, though, will elicit all other kinds of attempts. Internationally, they will try to come in and take care of it and start their own currency. But it wouldn't be that difficult for us to just look to the Constitution for guidance. They're not permitted to print money. We're not even allowed under our Constitution to have paper money, because the founders were outraged by the inflationary crisis of the continental money, and they didn't want that to happen again. But the Federal Reserve is bad for a lot of reasons. It's secret, passes on, takes care of their friends. But one of the reasons why I detest the Fed the most is the fact that it facilitates big government. Because, you can tax just so much and you can borrow just so much. If you did not have a Fed that would buy government debt, if we in the Congress spent too much and started borrowing, what would happen? Interest rates would go up, and the Congress would have to quit. So without a Fed, we could never have gotten into this crisis. And what does Congress spend the money on? Well, it's a bipartisan agreement. We spend it on war and welfare. And therefore, the military machine grows and the welfare system keeps growing, and irresponsibly, because the facilitator, the Federal Reserve, always takes care of that debt. And that's how we just keep digging deeper and deeper hole. When I talk to many young people, younger than this audience, it doesn't seem to be difficult for most people to grasp this whole idea of, oh, you need some money, just print it. They know we can't do it. We go to jail for it. But we end up allowing the Fed to do it in secrecy and think the money won't lose value. It is just astounding that we as a people have allowed our government to do this. But since this crisis is coming, we have to prepare our way and to understand. This is why I'm so delighted when I meet young people and they say that it's what I've been fascinated with is my introduction through some of the things that I've said into Austrian economics, because there's so many answers there for what we can do. And this would be a great step in the right direction, and it is part of the freedom philosophy. We want limited government, obviously, and we want to limit our spending. But we also have to understand economic problems and economic theory, because too many people think that it's necessary always to have the government there, that you couldn't do it. You don't want any regulations at all. I've made statements. We don't need a bunch of regulators up in Washington. Or does that mean you don't want any regulations? You want regulations for the marketplace. What they do is they cancel out the marketplace. For instance, if you get overextended and you can't pay your bills, there is a bankruptcy. You don't get bailed out by the government. I mean, you don't have companies like General Motors and all the banks get bailed out by the taxpayers. So there is a lot of regulations. You have to, we should put regulations on counterfeiting, of course, but the government counterfeiting as well as individual counterfeiting, because so there's too often, if you're defending the free market, you'll be charged with you don't care about anything, you don't care about the people, you don't care about regulation. But free markets are very, very tough to regulate. Even in environmental issues, you say, oh, you don't have, what would happen if we didn't have all of these federal government regulations to protect our environment? Well, what right does anybody have to pollute their neighbor's property? You don't have a right to do that. If it's a strict property right, which was neglected back in the Industrial Revolution, property rights were not cared about, and governments and industry polluted our waters and our air. But in a free society, you don't have the right to. So there are a lot of strict regulations, and it restrains, government activities. So we have a lot of challenges before us, but we have to decide first, what should the role of government be? I don't find that all that complex. I mean, studying history and economics and my personal desires, I think the most we should ever ask from our government is to protect our liberty. President, too laissez-faire. People can do anything they want and nobody will be taken care of. There will be no safety net. But the alternative, if you had a free society and you had your liberties, you would have more prosperity. The country would be richer, it would be better distributed, and people are very generous, and we did live that way at the time, and there weren't people starving or having no medical care before. But we have to have an understanding and a confidence in freedom, that it does work. But we have lost our confidence. We have, as a people, come around to thinking, oh, it won't work if the government doesn't do this. They have to take care of us. The big problem with that is, if you get soft and you say, well, yes, the poor, we want to help, and you introduce this notion of welfare transfer to the needy, what happens is the rich get all the benefits. They're the ones who get, they might be the ones in the military-industrial complex who contrive to have a foreign policy that we have, and they make billions of dollars off this, and they throw crumbs to the poor. I don't think the poor people break out. They lose their job and their dignity and everything else because we have lost our confidence in how a free society works. A lot is said, and I notice our president will say this on occasion, and I hear it all the time. They say, well, we need to solve this problem. We know what I'm saying is correct, and you're right, we need to do something. And the only way we can do this is everybody has to sacrifice. And I just don't buy into that thing. Why would it be a sacrifice to you if I delivered to you a society which made you a free person, and that off the government, if you are living off the government, yeah, you might lose something, but it should be construed that we all have to sacrifice. What if I would say to you, okay, you're going to have property rights and government can't tell you how to use your property as long as you don't use your property and hurt somebody else? What if I said to you that, yes, in a free society, nobody's going to take care of you, but there'll be jobs and you can go out and work and the government has no right to your income?
Yeah.
Liberals and some conservatives have slipped into saying that, you know, if you give a tax break to somebody, it will be a cost to government. I think that's one of the most atrocious statements because it concedes that you endorse the idea that the government owns everything you make. You know, if they assume they own 100% and they allow you to keep a certain percentage. You should own 100%, and when we need to take care of each other, ourselves, and our family and friends, we do this in a voluntary manner. And but we don't have to sacrifice. The same way when it comes to, that is for economic security. What about personal security? What do they tell you, especially since 9/11? They say, well, we'll take care of you. We're going to make you safe. Our job in government is to make you safe, but you have to give up a little bit of your freedoms. I don't think you ever have to do that, because I think if you do, as it was said many years ago, that you give up both your safety and your security and your privacy. So it has no benefit to us to give up our security, to give up our liberties for our security. But that's what they tell us. We don't have confidence. Private property rights do a whole lot to provide our security. Matter of fact, I think probably 95% of our safety today, or higher, isn't provided because there's a policeman outside your door. It's probably because a lot of you believe in the Second Amendment.
Yeah!
I've said many times why our foreign policy helps encourage those individuals who become hateful toward us and willing to do us a great harm. But the stage that was set prior to 9/11 was in many ways set by our government, not only with the foreign policy and the blowback theory, but the fact that security was already a government function. The government was in charge of checking us out. And they had rules. Don't ever resist a hijacker, and don't ever have a gun, even with a pilot, on an airplane. So it sort of sets the stage, you know, for that. Now, if you were a private airline and you had that threat, and you had the liability, and the government wasn't going to provide you security and guarantee it for you, you might have thought, well, you know, somebody might break in and into a cockpit and give us trouble, and you could devise your own safety mechanisms. But let me tell you, for personal experience, because I have to fly on airplanes a whole lot, I don't have any confidence in the TSA, the Department of Homeland Security, taking care of me. I've thought a lot about the foreign policy over the years, and it is a big issue. It is a big issue. The issue of liberty is the key issue, and monetary policy is important. But foreign policy today is very, very important. And unfortunately, it is bipartisan. I mean, that is one area. I can get a dozen or two Democrats and maybe a dozen or so Republicans to start talking about non-intervention. Oh, they said, that sounds terrible. That sounds like you're an isolationist. It's not isolationism just to bring our troops and weapons and you know, all that military home. It's isolationism when you have walls around you, won't trade with people. A free society will allow you to spend your money the way you want. If you want to buy foreign products, you should be allowed to buy foreign products, and you should be able to travel where you want to go. That is not isolationism. But that's what they would like to paint it as. But free trade is one thing that I believe is very helpful. I think we should have been trading with Cuba a long time ago. Castro wouldn't have lasted if they would have seen more American products instead of saying, no, you can't go in. and trade with Cuba. We do better, even though I think it's still dangerous with China. We're doing a lot better with China than when I was in high school because we were fighting the Korean War. You know, and now at least they depend on us because we provide a market for them and we buy their goods, and that's there's a lot of shortcomings there, but it has to do with the monetary problems with us issuing the reserve currency. But anyway, I think that trade is very helpful. But on the foreign policy, we have just gone off the board on that. We now have. Some people estimate it could be 900 bases overseas, 130 countries. And they say, oh, we don't have an empire. Well, what is it if it's not an empire? Because we have troops everywhere, and we don't have any money. So the country looked, and they elected last time somebody they thought would be less militant, would end the war in Iraq, and, you know, start bringing troops up and this sort of thing. So what do we have? Another president that doubles the size of the military in Afghanistan. The Iraq war is far from over, in my opinion, and expanding the drone bombing of Pakistan. I mean, why are you and I responsible morally and financially to be dropping bombs by the CIA? By what right where did this all come from? That a military operation on bombing a foreign country is run by the CIA. I wonder what the military, how the military and the CIA get together on this. But they launch these things out of D.C., you know, with all this technology. And guess what? Sometimes innocent people die when they do this. But financially, this is coming to an end. We spend $1.2 trillion a year on our foreign policy and our foreign operations. And we could spend a lot less and be a lot safer and do some significant cutting into our deficit. Well, you're all wrong because Iraq was a tremendous success. You know, we have transferred them into a great democracy. You know, that's another thing that bugs me. A few other things bug me too. But here we go. They say we have to go over there to spread democracy. Spread democracy through a gun. Go over there and insist these countries have elections. And then if our guy doesn't win, then we exclude him. We won't even talk to him. So, and then if there's a dictator that will do our bidding, like in many countries, some countries that follow Sharia law, like Saudi Arabia, they're our best buddy. It just happens, accidentally, I think, that they have oil in their country, you know, and then we tolerate it. Then all of a sudden, the people finally look like they're rising up in the Middle East and in Mediterranean saying, enough, we want to get rid of some of these guys. And so, for humanitarian reasons, what do? We expand the Bush doctrine of preventative war. You know, you're supposed to start the war before they started on us. I mean, we're in the... Why do we tolerate it? Why do we put up with it? But now we do it for humanitarian reasons. And there was no, I mean, there's a mess over there, there's no doubt. And like last night on TV, they said, you mean you would just let the people suffer if the dictator said he's going to go and kill these people? I said, you know, under the circumstances, yes, I don't have the authority. I think before we think we can solve all those problems over there, we ought to solve the problems here on our economy. Are we protecting our civil liberties? I would say if you are concerned about your civil liberties and you want to do something, make sure you support the candidates who want to get rid of the Patriot Act. And of course, during the last campaign, there was a lot of criticism about what was going on with military tribunals and torture and assassination, but it's all continuing. Now the assassination program can be used according to public policy stated against American citizens. Oh, they say, well, these are bad guys. Well, yeah, they may be a bad guy, but you're setting a precedent. What if someday there's somebody in Washington that think we're bad guys? So we don't want to ever give up the rule of law and the process so that it can't be held, you know, without habeas corpus. But we're doing that. And so we have little respect for civil liberties. But there has been erosion. I think since the 9/11 and the Patriot Act, all these things have made it much worse. But even before that, there had been attack. Well, for decades on, there's been a vicious attack on all citizens through our IRS regulations. And I think we put up with that. I mean, we're considered guilty until we prove ourselves innocent. That's not part of the Constitution. And then also, we have put up way too long with our loss of civil liberties when it comes to this war on drugs. The war on drugs doesn't solve any problems. They tried prohibition back in the old days and it didn't work very well, but you know what? Back in 1919, I guess it was, they wanted to have prohibition of alcohol because there were some bad things happen when people drink alcohol. So they wanted to prohibit it. So what did they do? They amended the Constitution. Can you imagine what it would be like today if somebody said, oh, I don't want you guys smoking a marijuana cigarette, so let's go write a constitutional amendment to make sure nobody smokes marijuana. I mean, there's so little respect. But you know, one thing that's interesting that's happening, I think it's very positive, and that has to do with nullification. Anybody ever hear about that? The left-wing pundits on the TV, they'll say, oh, that's that radical left-wing stuff that we just totally, right-wing stuff that we just totally disagree with. You know, your states' rights people, and that's a real negative term. But you know what? There are state laws written in California and other states that says that sick people can use marijuana when they're sick and dying because some people really find it can help. So they write a state law that says that. But the feds come in and they overrule the state law and they will put sick people in jail for using marijuana because it helps them. I would say nullification there, left and right, ought to support that position. In Iraq, where they claimed this victory, I think that it's probably worse off than even before. Even as bad as Saddam Hussein was, and he was a monster, but he didn't have nuclear weapons like we were told. He did not deal with the Al-Qaeda, which we were told he did. And he actually, you know, had a bit of tolerance for Christians. He had a Christian in his department, in his administration. And that doesn't mean anybody should interpret this that I'm defending this guy. I'm defending non-intervention is what I'm defending. So we go over there, and because we want to punish somebody, we have to punish somebody even if they're unrelated to 9/11. So we decide that the #1 target is Iraq, that we're going to remake Iraq. So we go in there, and we lost 3,000 people, so we go over there and lose 5,000 Americans. It makes no sense. And what have we done? We took a very messy country where the minority Sunnis were controlling the Shiites and turned the country back over because we want the Shiites to take over. Guess what? They're buddies with Iran. So we've literally turned that country over to the Iranians. And at the same time, we got rid of you know, one of the greatest opponents to radical Islam. So I don't see how that's going to be much better. Most of the Christians have had to leave Iraq, and for us to claim a great victory there is just foolish. The cost was way too high, and the sooner we can get out of all those countries and come home, the better. I think we ought to come home from the Middle East because it doesn't serve our purpose. Don't you think it's time we come home from Korea and Japan and Germany? I think we're going to win that argument. Not so much that I'm going to give a great speech in the Congress and then I'm going to convert them, but we're going to win. We'll win this argument because we will not be able to maintain this foreign policy. We thought that we would have learned a lesson that what brought the Soviets finally down to their knees was getting bogged down in a war in Afghanistan. So, well, we'll do it better. We'll go in Afghanistan. We won't get bogged down. But here we are, once more, bogged down and bankrupting ourselves. You know, one of the worst interpretations, or a significant interpretation, is if you read exactly what Osama bin Laden said his plans were. And he never believed we would fall so deeply into his trap by stirring up trouble. He had three goals. He wanted to get us militarily bogged down in the Middle East or in as many countries as possible. It sounds to me like we did his bidding. The second thing he wanted to do was to cause a financial crisis in this country, to spend so much money that the crisis would hit and it would take us into bankruptcy. His same theory was against Afghanistan at the time. And the other thing he wanted to do was create dissent in this country. And he probably was thinking at the time the dissent that occurred in the 60s. That isn't happening in this country. But there is a significant interest in it now, and a growing interest for financial reasons. It's not the same as the 60s, and I was in the military in the 60s, and I understood it pretty well, what was happening. But what we're doing now, though, is exactly what he expected us, or didn't expect us to do, but exactly what he wanted us to do and hoped that we would do. But since we have done that, we don't change our policy. We just continue the same old policy, and the bankruptcy will come, and then we'll have to change. Same way with the Fed. We're probably not going to legislate the Fed out of existence. I work on all kinds of ways. Get rid of them tomorrow, get rid of the Fed, out of the Fed, do whatever. And I've introduced this notion to allow just competition with the monopoly, because they're a monopoly and they control it. But when they destroy the dollar, they will destroy themselves, and the burden will fall on a new generation to come up with some answers. And you'll have to have some answers. You'll have to either decide that you want to live in a totalitarian society or a free society. And if you want a free society, we have the information, we have the ideas, we need the determination. We will never have a large majority ever understanding all the issues. But if you have a significant number in a minority who are eager enough to spread a message and lead, we will be able to get our country out of this and talk about sound money and sensible foreign policy and civil liberties, shrink the size of government, regional government. We should always argue the case that the more local the government, the better. Self-determination, whether it's international or domestic or local, I think is a good one. Why should people always think that bigger is better when it comes to government? The largest amount of freedom you have is what we want, not the bigger the government, because that is exactly the opposite. The bigger the government, the less liberties you're going to have. One of the problems that we have, because I think my goal in life is to have a society where we can all work for our own virtue and excellence. And that means you make your own choices. You can make good choices or bad choices. If you make bad choices, you suffer the consequence and nobody else. But you make the decisions on what kind of life, what kind of religious life you want, what type of intellectual life you want. And if you make those decisions, you have to live with them. If the government gets involved in telling you how to be virtuous, how you're going to be a better person, how you're going to be more healthy, making sure that you can't even allow your kids to ride a tricycle without a helmet on, and all the kind of thing. The government's always going to be, the nanny state taking care of us. If you allow the government to tell us how we're going to be safe and how what these conditions, it only can be done by removal of liberty. And it's the liberty, the issue of the liberty, the right for you to make your own decision. I think the First Amendment is a good example of how we should look at this. Most people understand the First Amendment. They know about religious freedom and the freedom of the press and freedom of assembly and freedom of speech. And we know that we don't have freedom of speech to talk about the weather. We have freedom of speech so I can come here and get a few things off my chest. It seems to be completely different. We recognize that intellectually you're allowed to have your own personal choices in religious matters, and that's pretty important. That is dealing with your hereafter and eternity. But when it comes to your own body, you're not allowed to make your decisions. They're going to make all the decisions for you. And I think the government should be out of it, out of those decisions. You get to make all your decisions intellectually, monetarily, and on your personal habits. And I think we'd all be better for it. I think that would create a society where people are free as individuals, as we all have been born, with our freedoms and our liberties, which then should release the creative energy that we would have to solve our problems. But everybody on the other side is going to say, oh no, you just don't care. You're not humanitarian. How are you going to take care of the poor and the people won't get medical care? There's no proof of that. There is absolute evidence to show the bigger the government, the worse the quality of education is and the worse the quality of our prosperity. We are a poorer nation the more the government is involved. So liberty, approximately 100 years ago or so, was divided into two pieces. For some reason, our country got this all mixed up. The founders understood that personal liberty and economic liberty were one and the same. But for some reason, we drifted away from that, and we had one group over here that's reasonably good on, say, economic liberty. And another group over here, a little bit better on personal liberties and personal civil liberties. And there was a time when there were elements in both the right and the left that thought we should be doing a lot less overseas. But liberty is one thing. Liberty is your life. And one thing that I have come around to saying is just a challenging statement because some people don't like this. I believe there's no collective rights. I don't believe you get a right to belong because you belong to a group. I don't think you should ever be penalized because you belong to a group, but you shouldn't have any privileges because you belong to a group. You have your rights. You have your rights because your rights come to you in a natural or God-given way, and you have a right to your life and your liberty. And if we allow our rights to be squandered, which I believe we are, we're in big trouble. We will lose this whole chance for this experiment. So the burden really falls on the next generation who's moving in with ideas. There'll be the teachers and there'll be the people in politics. They'll be doing the many things. But things are moving so much faster. In the 50s and 60s, when I first started getting interested in this, things moved so slowly. The ideas were slow to spread about. But just think of the rapidity of spreading ideas now and the organizations through the internet. I mean, we don't have to wait for the government-approved programs to tell us what we're supposed to believe. We have a chance, really, to do so much more because of the conditions that are happening. The bad news is good news because the people are waking up. I never dreamed. If you'd have asked me 5, 6 years ago that we would get a lot of attention over the Federal Reserve as we're getting right now, I wouldn't have believed that. But the conditions, the markets are telling us there's a serious problem. At the same time, the spreading of the information, the teaching of Austrian economics is all coming together. So the revolution is really an intellectual revolution. It's an intellectual revolution, and that is where we're winning. And it's going to get tough. It's going to get worse before it gets better. But there's every reason in the world to believe that if we do our job, we can solve these problems. So many young people especially come up, okay, what do I do? What am I supposed to do? What's my exact job? Do I run for this office? Do I do this? Or should I go to school? You know, you do what you want to do. And if you believe in liberty, there will always be a role for you to play. But the most important thing is to be able to take care of yourself. That's number one. And also to study the freedom philosophy, to understand and reveal to your neighbors and friends and the people you can, and get after your members of Congress and help. Because, you know, they signed on to auditing a Fed not because I persuaded them. It's because you persuaded them. You talked to them and sent a message. So there is a role for everybody to play. One thing I also am convinced of is that those individuals, many here in this audience, as I felt at one time, once you believe you tend to understand this, you know, you're going to have a hard time sitting on your hands because you have a greater obligation. Most people don't get interested. Most people wouldn't come to a lecture like this. But most people will go along if the prevailing attitudes are changed. And those of you who are interested in this subject is to influence the prevailing attitudes, to get people to change their minds and accept it. People, when they know it's in their best interest to be arguing for their freedoms, in their best interest to bring our troops home, in their best interest to get rid of the Fed, they're going to support it. They're not going to argue with it. And right now, today, most people are starting to realize that their interests aren't best served with what we're getting out of Washington, because things are getting worse, the deficits get worse, and they talk back and forth, and we know the parties aren't significantly different. We spend all this money, and lives are lost spreading democracy around the world. At the same time, we have a hard time even getting a third party on tickets and getting ballot status and getting in debates. So we have a long way to go. But where the real excitement is the energy that comes from the younger generation, the college people especially, and all those who are young in heart. Believe me, people are recognizing this, and the burden is falling on your hands, because we're not going to solve this problem next week or next month. That budget isn't going to be balanced. The crisis is going to come. The only question is, what are we going to allow it to be replaced with? Are we going to allow tyranny to come and a man on a white horse come down and say, I'll take care of you, I can do this? The one thing that you have, one rule you have to follow, and that is, in order to make the world a better place, you have to reject the notion that you use violence and force to do it. You have to do it through persuasion. If we want to change the world, if we want to change the Middle East, if we want to change Africa, you do it by spreading ideas and through persuasion. But the most important thing we do is do our job here, set an example so others would want to emulate us, and that should be our goal.